Welcome to meeting number 19 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research.
Is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd. We have members who are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. And pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, June 16th, we are meeting, it's our first study, of research and scientific publication in French. And I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. As you know, interpretation for those on Zoom, you have a choice at the bottom of your screen of either French, English, or Zoom. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, as you know, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. And I'd now like to welcome our guests. We are so delighted to have you, and we're looking forward to listening to you. Appearing as an individual, we have Professor Sylvie Lamoureux, full professor and research chair in language management. From ACFAS, we have Professor Jean-Pierre Perrault, President, Professor Anne-Josée Villeneuve, President from Alberta, and Madame Laura Pelche, Project Manager for Canadian Francophonie. Each group will have 5 minutes to present. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this card. It lets you know you have 30 seconds to finish. And with that, je vous passe la parole à Professeur.
I will cede the floor to Professor Lamoureux. Do I need to turn on my mic? It's already working very good. Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, members of the committee, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this first committee meeting as part of your inquiry into research and scientific publishing in French. I would like to congratulate you on having chosen this particular topic for your inquiry. Protecting and promoting scientific research and publication in French is important, not only for the dissemination and mobilization of knowledge, but also for the promotion and continued growth of the French language, a language that Daniel Lavoie, a musician, describes in his song Jour de Plaine as a language that thinks, a beautiful and proud language. Scientific research and publication in French has been a hot topic for over 40 years now, and the evolution of work over the past decade of colleagues such as Vincent Larivière, Université de Montréal, Richard Marcoux, Université Laval, demonstrate the urgency of addressing this issue. Like Quebec's chief scientists, Rémi Quirion, I believe that we must promote more research in French, including scholarly publications and publications for the general public. Real language to disseminate findings to communities involved in research and to Francophone communities as well. And thus, make of Canada a country that shines in the world of the francophonie and even beyond. I was delighted, even envious, when the Fonds de Recherche du Québec launched the Publication en Français competitions, a great incentive to encourage and promote French language publishing. I am grateful for the support of the various levels of government for Francophone and bilingual journals in the social sciences and humanities, arts and letters, most of which are open access on Érudite platform. However, the reality is that scientific publication in French and the promotion of Francophone scientific knowledge are on the decline. The work of Vincent Larivière confirms a significant decline in the creation of new scientific journals in French in the world and in Canada. The creation of the Érudite Consortium has been of primordial importance for the recognition of research in French in Canada, but also internationally. Professor Richard Marcoux, Université Laval, highlighted the precarious existence of Canadian scholarly journals with a limited readership. While they do not represent a business opportunity for foreign publishers or organizations that might subsidize them, they still fill an important need for Canadian issues, compelling Canadian issues. These findings can inform issues internationally. Their research on scientific publication in the social sciences and humanities in Canada shows that while Francophone researchers draw on English language scientific production, Anglophone researchers rarely cite or draw on French language scientific production. This is problematic. As a language is more than mere words, it's a culture, a way of thinking, a way of seeing the world. Based on my various academic positions I've held at a bilingual university, the University of Ottawa, I can confirm that many young researchers are worried about the negative impact on tenure and promotion opportunities if they publish in French. Francophone journals are often not indexed. Publishing in French means accepting to be less cited. And for some, this leads to lower status rather than are all deciding to value our language and to share information in our language. How can we promote research and publication of French among up-and-coming researchers, both young and not so young, in Canada? On a day-to-day basis, the lack of publications in French is a challenge to the conceptualization even of my university courses. I have no choice but to use English language publications in a French course given in French, since equivalent articles in French are not available. How can I justify this? How can I explain this to Francophone and even international French students who are expecting to be able to read at least most of their material in French? My research is not directly on the topic you are considering, but it does deal with a secondary impact of it, an impact of this homogenization. We notice that fewer theses, master's and PhD, are written up in French, which strengthens the stereotype that to carry on science and have a career in science, you must do so in English. And this is something that actually affects students even at the secondary level. Young students think that I need to study English, learn English, because science is published in English. To succeed, I must work in English. That's what I find in my research. Young people tell me why they left high school in French, a French high school, and went into an English high school, even if they were originally Francophone. In Ontario, French language secondary schools were established after 1969. Professor Lamoureux, I'm so sad to tell you that we must interrupt you.
Questions, you will be able to finish your material. Thank you so very much. Et maintenant, je vous passe la parole.
And now, I will cede the floor to Akfas. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, good evening, and thank you for your invitation to appear here today. I'm Jean-Pierre Perrault, President of l'ACFAS and Vice Rector of Research and Graduate Studies at the University of Sherbrooke. Our association is a century-old learning society of Canadian Francophone researchers. Our study, Portrait des défis de la recherche en français au Canada, or a portrait of French language research in Canada and the challenges that it faces, shows that French-speaking researchers make up 21% of Canada's research community, and that only half of them submit grant applications to federal granting councils or agencies in the French language. In my own discipline, RNA biochemistry, I simply can't imagine receiving a grant were I to apply for it in French. There are 3 main reasons for this. First, granting agencies have long had the bad reputation of poorly handling French applications. Because grant application reviewers self-assess their levels of bilingualism, some actually do not fully understand the French applications they read. Thus, some Francophone researchers have received nonsensical explanations of why their projects have not been funded. And some granting agencies have a lower success rate for applications submitted in French instead of English. As you can imagine, this has led to distrust among French-speaking researchers. Clearly, federal granting agencies must continue their work to reverse this trend and merit trust. Second, as a minority group, members of a minority group, many Francophone researchers work in English language universities. Therefore, they cannot submit their applications in French, as their university would not be able to understand it. To overcome this particular obstacle, ACFAS hopes to set up a Service d'aide à la recherche en français au Canada, a service to help with research in French in Canada. Third, there's the obvious reason that the international context of research makes English the common language. The results of our study show that the number of French language scholarly publications and communications is in decline. Our respondents, all members of Canada's Francophone minority, tell us that they publish in English in order to reach a wider audience, be more widely cited, have a better chance of obtaining grants, and advance their careers. English is a language of most prestigious scholarly journals, and these play a significant role in bolstering researcher CVs. Having a common language is essential to research, of course, but we must remain mindful of local realities. Knowledge translation or transmission to communities is needed. And the French language to disseminate research must be developed. French language scholarly journals play a critical role in developing such vocabulary. The international research environment is not solely to blame for the decline in French language scholarly publications. Other factors are, as I've said, the low level of confidence in granting agencies, a lack of funding for scholarly journals in French, scientific activities in French, and the Francophone communities that support them. But there's also lack of recognition. We need broader criteria for valuing our Canadian researchers. We should recognize the many different professor-researcher profiles, assigning excellence to each of them. Some researchers use their expertise to advance knowledge, yes, but also their society, by advising community groups, studying local matters that reflect the specific community issues that they observe, and so forth. Why value these researchers less merely because their research does not have an international impact? It makes no sense to me. I do point out that our requests are in line with an international movement for multilingualism in research led by the Helsinki Initiative. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer your questions. With me also to answer questions, Anne-Josée Villeneuve, a professor working in Alberta who runs 2 scholarly journals, one in French and the other bilingual, and Ms. Laura Pelletier, project manager at ACFAS. Thank you. Professor Perrault, thank you very much.
Our witnesses for joining us, and I'd also like to recognize that tonight we're joined from members, Monsieur Boulouris and Ms. Thompson. Welcome to the committee as well. We thank our witnesses, and dear colleagues, we will now go to our first round of questions. Our members will be very interested in hearing your advice. And tonight, this is a 6-minute round, and we begin with Mr. Williams, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Those témoins.
Thank you to our witnesses as well for having joined us tonight. I'm very sorry. I'll be putting questions in English this evening, but I am learning French.
Monsieur Perrault, in your 2021 summary report, you mentioned that this situation got the attention of the Official Languages Commission in 2008 and the SSHRC in 2011. What were the recommendations of the symposiums held in 2008 and 2011, and were the recommendations ever acted upon?
Je vais laisser Madame Pelletier répondre.
I'll allow Ms. Pelletier to answer your question, given that she is a specialist on this file in charge of Canadian Francophonie issues within ACFAS. Yes, thank you for your question, Madam Chair. In the report, the long version of our report, you could find in the literature summary a succinct summary of the recommendations devolving from the symposiums that were held, but they're similar to what we recommend in our study, which are a need to give value to scientific work in French and the various communities and players who support it. And the very study of this should also be continued.
If you could give us some numbers. Say, for example, you have two equal researchers of the same field, one Anglophone and one Francophone. If they wanted to publish their findings in a scholarly journal, how many journals would be available to each researcher in their mother tongue?
Oui, j'ai pas le chiffre exact.
Yes, I don't have a specific figure at the tip of my tongue, but it does appear in the report. There is a table showing the number of French language publications by province. And in provinces other than Quebec, of course, there are many more scholarly journals published in English in which researchers can publish. You will see that there are some provinces where there's only a single French language publication. Also, I might add that scholarly journals in French, mostly social science and humanities. I'm a healthcare researcher, same for engineering or natural sciences researchers. All said and done, there are pretty much no journals in French.
Publishing opportunities hold back innovative discoveries by Francophone researchers, and if so, can you give us some examples?
Je ne sais pas si Anne-Josée...
Perhaps Anne-Josée would like to respond? Professor Villeneuve, perhaps? Yes, thank you. Publication in social science and humanities is often easier. It can be easier to share our works, disseminate them in a majority language, being English in this case, than in French. It depends on what you've carried your research out on. If you're, let's say, researching Francophonie itself, then it's easier to publish in French. But if you're researching a political science issue, anthropology, sociology, and so forth, you have access to many more scientific journals in English, and most of them are indeed in English. There are many more to choose from, and most of them are in English. The journals that are published in French are usually generalist journals, social science and humanities in general, and more particularly about French or Francophonie. So you have a greater choice of Francophone journals if you're working on la Francophonie.
Je peux ajouter, c'est pas non.
I could add that it's not merely a matter of how many, but also the fact that a number of journals are not sufficiently supported or funded. It's not a matter necessarily of increasing the number of publications in each sector. Yes, that's an issue, but also ensure that what already exists is sufficiently funded to survive.
Journals not translated into French?
Est-ce qu'il est,
If I may, I'll make my response bilingual, just for the purposes of tonight's discussion. Usually, a researcher who publishes in one language is discouraged from publishing the same article in the other language. So it would be considered essentially self-plagiarism. Alors, ça veut dire que si
that means that if you publish an article in French on a certain topic in a certain journal, it's very likely that you won't be able to publish it in the other language. There's no systematic way to ensure that an article is translated, once it's published in English, into another language, such as French or any other non-English language used around the world. There's no systematic way that's done.
Last question, Madam Chair. Should it be? Yes, sorry, yes or no?
Williams, you might want to ask for a written answer just because you're out of time.
Sure. Yes or no will be quick, though. So, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Monsieur Lauzon, maintenant, je vous passe la parole.
Mr. Lauzon, I recognize you. You have 6 minutes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Perrault and Ms. Lamoureux. I will begin with Ms. Lamoureux, Professor Lamoureux. You've mentioned the researcher Vincent Larivière. I find that very interesting. I researched a publication in 2018, and I learned then that fewer and fewer scholarly journals are published in French in Canada. And that's of 1940, 1950, when there was since then, it's been 80% English, 20% or 90 English, 10% French. But as of the beginning of this century, there's been a drastic decline. Why is that? In the past, at least in recent history, there was some sort of balance, some sort of equality. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I think it's not merely about the number of scientists, the number of researchers. If you go back to the 1940s and so on, it was standard back then to have to learn a second language, a language other than the principal language you had studied in. At the end of the 1990s, the year 2000, universities began to withdraw that requirement that had existed in the past up to the 1980s. Even for doctorates in Canadian history, imagine that. You've got a PhD in Canadian history and you can't read one of the official languages of the country. The greatest number of scholarly journals was created in the 1990s. Since then, it's been dropping off. And more of the world is operating in English. Also, people have had to justify funding, and if you haven't got a big readership, it's much more difficult to justify requests for funding. Years ago, there was a considerable decline in funding, even within Quebec, of Quebec scholarly journals. A number of factors then. Globalization, the emphasis on English in globalization, the loss of the prior bilingualism of intelligentsia, university-educated people. Might it be a solution to work with the universities to ensure that within graduate programs, both official languages be required of students in order to support French? Might that be part of the solution? What do you think? Go back to what was happening in the 1980s, 1990s. I think that's a wonderful idea, but I don't think it's something that I'll see in my lifetime. I'm 56 right now, for your information, and people live long in my life due to academic freedom, the freedom of programs in universities, and also the sort of internationalization of research. This would have to be required not only of Francophone universities, but also Anglophone universities. It's not only a matter of ensuring that things be published, it's also about giving value to what's published. When I want to publish in Ontario in French, it's not very sexy. I get these rejection letters saying,
please try a Francophone journal. Mais si je veux vraiment échanger puis démontrer les liens entre ce que je fais.
But if I'm trying to show that there are links between what I'm doing and, let's say, Wales, then I lose that option. It's two issues, but we might, of course, ask the Commissioner for Official Languages to work with the Université Milieu and suggest this. I think it's certainly a good idea to aim for plurilingualism, both nationally and internationally. Why not? Could you perhaps tell us, it might be Professor Perrault or yourself, Professor Lamoureux, which sector is doing worst? Where have the losses been felt most? I think I'll ask Mr. Perrault to answer that. I would say health, engineering, but especially health. There's pretty much nothing left. Engineering, a couple of scholarly journals that are bilingual, but no more than that. So that's where most of the decline has occurred. I think you've brought up a good point, though. And the Official Languages Act and the commissioner there might be able to ensure that research in both languages flourish. Do you agree with this, Mr. Professor Lamoureux, what Mr. Perrault has just said, well, it's easier to publish if you're writing on language policy, for example. But I think that given the ongoing discussion, revising or reviewing the Official Languages Act, ACFAS has a role to play, the Commissioner has a role to play, but how to make this a current topic? We've been talking about this for 40 years. Will we have to wait another 40 years before we actually go beyond talking about it? I think it's an urgent matter. This must be picked up by politicians. Inasmuch as a government, I mean, you're saying that one way forward, that I'm suggested is to go back to the situation that we were in before, bilingualism of researchers. I've got 20 seconds left. What could the federal government do, Mr. Perrault? Hands-on, what do we actually do via the universities, via the Languages Act? Where should we lean? Well, you need to get it in the actual wording of the Act. I'm very sorry, Mr. Lauzon.
Time is over. Perhaps you would like to ask Professor Perrault to table a written response.
Yes, I would like to have a written response on this one because it's a major issue. Thank you.
Monsieur Lauzon. Et maintenant, je vous parle.
Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. And now I recognize Mr. Jonca. Thank you. Mr. Blanchette-Jonca. I will turn my time over to Mr. Perrault so that he can finish what he had to say. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Madam Chair, I think as we were underscoring earlier, and I indeed laid this out in my opening remarks, it's all very well to fund to ensure that scholarly journals continue to exist and flourish and be able to disseminate knowledge and ensure knowledge translation, but we also need to better fund scientific activities in France and organizations that organize those activities. There's been a breakdown in that over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Funding has been sliding in the wrong direction. Everything costs more, less funding. That leads to the situation we're now in. So we need very concrete measures to raise the bar, making of research a fundamental element in reviewing the Act. That's one thing, but you need to ensure that the necessary means are applied to change the situation. Thank you. I'd like to go back to Mr. Perrault. Your report, which is very eloquent, published in 2021, mentioning or researching the portrait of French language research in Canada and the challenges that it faces, and in pointing out that it's necessary to support French in order to ensure knowledge translation and mobilization in French. Quebec provided funding to this end. Could you tell us what's going on at the federal level compared to what's going on in Quebec? I'll start, and I'll allow Professor Pelletier to complete the answer. Remember that offering services to the research community in a minority context is important. Let's say you have a researcher in an English language institution researching the French language in their region and how it's used, must translate their questionnaires and their research projects so that their English language universities can submit it to one of the three, let's say, federal granting agencies where it could be funded. So that's an example. We could create a service, which we intend to create, a service to support French language, research in French, and that's the sort of thing we could do. We could ensure that all that is translated, available in both languages. That's the sort of funding that we are looking for. We're looking to the federal government to support such services to help with research in French in Canada offered across Canada, and we think that the government should support us on this so that we can offer such a service to the entire university community. I will add that we are also supported by the University Organization for la Francophonie. We also have private funders. We're now looking for federal funding. Right. So far, we haven't succeeded with the feds. We think that federal granting agencies should play a role. given that we will help them meet their obligations in matters of bilingualism. Right now, they're not receiving as many grant requests in French as they would like. That's often due to the fact that a number of researchers would like to apply for grants in French but can't do so because they are in an English language university. So this service would be very useful, and it's much needed to support Francophone researchers in minority contexts. It's worth specifying that this isn't only about small institutions. This is also true for a researcher at the University of Toronto who is actually, let's say, in the Francophone language department. All right. From ACFAS, just to get this clear, right now the government of Quebec is supporting the development of scientific research in minority situations across Canada. That's correct. All right. My next question is for Professor Villeneuve. I know that you preside a research community out in Western Canada. You are also in charge of some Francophone and bilingual scientific publications. Could you tell us more about your experience? Yes, thank you for your question, Madam Chair. I direct 2 scientific publications. One is linked to the Francophone department of the University of Toronto. It's called Arborescence, which covers language and pedagogy in French. Our overall topic is French language studies and the study of French. Most of the publications most of the articles are in French. We work by issue on a theme, and we are able to publish only 1 edition a year. The management and of such a scientific publication is carried out by volunteers who receive the text, evaluate the submissions, make recommendations, work on the text, and then ensure publication. That's, throughout the entire publication process, it takes a long time. When research is not valued, fewer people are willing to step up to the plate to carry out all this work. The second scientific journal that I co-manage, Arborescence, I work with another professor at University de Toronto with, is the second one then is the Canadian Journal of Linguistics, which is the publication of the Canadian Association of Linguistics. Once again, this is about languages, the scientific study of languages. We publish 4 issues a year of the second publication. We have 2 co-editors. Actually, we have 4 of us and an assistant. I, once again, am very sorry to tell you that, Professor Villeneuve, that I must interrupt you. We're out of time for your answer.
Here, we appreciate your testimony. Just, I notice a hand keeps going up, and our members will ask who they want to speak to, so please don't feel people are being rude. We are very welcome, and we're very grateful to have you. And
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair, I will ask Professor Villeneuve if she could give us a written answer regarding the issues that she was starting to discuss related to the Francophone publications that she edits and that she manages. Indeed.
Ines, for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And once again, thank you to our witnesses, our experts who are spending some of their time this evening to discuss this very important issue with us. In the past, years past, I was a university student. I studied social sciences. And I remember that even back then, if a student couldn't read in English, it was impossible to even get through a BA. And this is social science. It's not even biochemistry or health sciences, which Mr. Perrault has brought up. And indeed, what you're telling us is that this hasn't improved since. Professor Lamoureux, you used a term earlier that I was sad to hear. You said that researchers fear publishing in French because they feel, or they're sure, that they will not be cited as much, their work will not be disseminated as broadly, and their research won't have as big an effect. So they tend to decide to publish in English. What do we do to turn this around? We can't invent new publications. Well, yes, I suppose the universities can and research groups can, but the federal government's not going to just, invent new scientific journals. So how do we support researchers so that they can publish? Right now, their careers suffer if they try to publish in French. Am I right on that? I think that a decade ago, it was more possible than it is now, certainly outside of Quebec. People are now aware of the challenges. The ACFA study has led to discussions within committees in charge of promoting researchers and overseeing grants and so on, because people are now more aware of the issue than they were. But research in French, at least for those who are not privileged to be in a francophone institution or bilingual institution, well, their issues must be discussed more broadly amongst scientists, all scientists, so that people understand what they're facing. It's about raising awareness and involving people. It's not because a scientific review or publication doesn't have the same impact value as, let's say, Nature, that your research is not credible or is not relevant, is not to be valued. The research that Mr. Perrault carried out on federal granting agencies, I myself have lived such situations. I have submitted grant requests in French, and the responses I got even questioned, what my doctorate was about. And I submitted the same thing the next year and was like the top choice of that committee. So for a Franco-Ontarian, it was very difficult to accept the first response, but the important thing is that I did get a grant second time around. But now I'm a full professor. I'm not as stressed. Of course, my word is taken. I'm taken at my word, and I publish. But I can show the way for others who are stuck in the situation I was in the past. It'll be very difficult to increase trust given the current situation, to create the trust required for Francophone researchers to stand up and say, I'm a Francophone researcher and I'm going to publish in French. Thank you, Professor Lamoureux. I'm going to go at a different issue. We've been discussing research centers and grant requests. Oh, I'm so sorry. The lights go off automatically in my office at a certain time if I'm not moving. There are 2% of us Francophones in North America, but there are many more of us if we take Francophonie around the world. Has anyone thought of going at this together with our French, African, Belgian colleagues? Many Africans use French as a language or a research language. Mr. Perrault? Yes, la francophonie. Francophones are part of la francophonie and part of many international groups. There are a number of international researchers who participate in our ACFAS community activities, for example. The Quebec research funds are often linked to those of other associations. There will be an event in November, I think, or in March, I can't quite remember, where we will work on these matters of how to value research and promote research within La Francophonie. Mr. Perrault probably knows more about this. I'll let him complete the answer. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, indeed. It's got to be a strategy, mobilizing the entirety of the Francophonie. This will create a much larger community that relies on French, and we have a lot of capacity then for working, co-work, collaboration. There will be an event in Quebec, probably in April, upcoming, that will address the promotion and organization of Francophone research in French, and it will be organized by a funding group or a funding grant from Quebec. Thank you. Do you have anything to add on that, Madame Villeneuve? Professor Villeneuve, I simply want to add that having a same language doesn't mean that you have the same culture or that you face the same issues. It's very important to ensure international collaboration, yes, among Francophone researchers, but we also need to keep in mind that identity issues, cultural, social issues also count and that they can be more local. We can't merely hand everything over to La Francophonie or imagine that La Francophonie as an international body is going to manage everything and forget about the need for bilingualism here in Quebec, not only language, but also research bilingualism in Quebec and Canada.
And now we will go, dear colleagues, to the 5-minute rounds, and we begin with Ms. Gladue.
Merci, Madame le Président.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I want to address what's going on around the world. I get it that in Germany, the researchers research in Germany and work in German, and similarly for France. How much research is carried out in French around the world then? And might we share this better than we're doing so now? And let me turn first to Professor Lamoureux. Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any figures. I was a guest professor in Germany for 6 months in a Canadian Studies program. And I was there to bring the view of Francophone Canada in the minority context. The program had been created with the funding support of Quebec. In India, there are 300 universities that offer Canadian studies, mostly in English, but they also take an interest in the Francophonie in Canada. And they do encourage multilingualism among their students. And often those research studies are published in French. Other national languages, there are a number of interesting studies published as of 15 years now showing that there's a good deal of pressure on state universities that operate in where the majority language context to increase publication in English. It's good to be a member of La Francophonie, given that French is used outside of Canada as well, but this is not a cure-all. I'm sorry, I don't have any figures. Mr. Perrault, do you have any figures or any lived experience to share? No, we don't have any figures on that, but I want to underscore that the funnel into English is observed on many levels. And that the publication issue is seen for many non-English languages, pretty much no scientific journals now in Italian and Japanese. Perhaps the sole exception is China, given that they're now carrying out much more scientific research than they did in 25 years ago. Otherwise, there's a decline in all languages other than English. As I mentioned in my publication, our requests are really aligned with a multilingualism effort coming out of the Helsinki Initiative. If I might add, take the Netherlands, for example. Representation counts. If you teach in English in the Netherlands, you're sending to the students the following message. Research, scientific careers depend on English. So Dutch students studying in English, that's not the right message to be sending. I think this should be from the ground up. You should have courses in English and in French, professors able to teach in both languages and support and really demonstrate the value of both of the languages. That's how it starts. Then that holds true through the master's, the PhD, and throughout universities. The message as of the BA is that French, and indeed all languages other than English, don't count for university education. But it might be possible here in Canada for the government to set up some sort of structure to ensure that publication take place in both official languages of the country. Does the government have the ability to do that? Would it be a good idea? The government, Madam Chair, the government could certainly provide better support to scientific journals, ensure that they're able to publish several editions a year, several issues a year, and promote themselves, really support a dynamic scientific community in French. I think that is an obligation for the government, the federal government. Thank you very much. And I add the government could also offer incentives to ensure that courses are given in both official languages and that professors be able to teach in both languages and be able to supervise research carried out by their students in either official languages.
This evening. I want to start with the whole issue of the post-secondary institutions in terms of what they're doing. And I think we've heard some evidence tonight in terms of what the provinces are doing. In some instances, examples have been given outside of the province of Quebec. We've heard some challenges in terms of the universities and probably the colleges as well. And then in terms of the granting agencies. So from my perspective, I'm hoping to get recommendations that focus on a strategy where all of those stakeholders are addressing the same issue with a strategy that will address I think the problems that have been identified from all of the witnesses. And so, Professor Lamoureux, can I start with you first in terms of what needs to happen in the post-secondary institution area? Of course, that involves the provinces. And then with federal government, how do we gel all of those together with a strategy that starts to tackle some of the trust issues that have been identified by Mr. Perreault and some of the other issues that the witnesses have raised here this evening?
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Because you asked it, but it's just jumped that way. So although the universities are under provincial control, what funds research, the important funding for research, at least outside Quebec, because they have the Fonds de Recherche de Québec that I'm so envious about, are the funding agencies, which is under federal control. So if there's a way of coupling that with something in the Official Languages Act, and perhaps in the languages and education funding, that is shared between the provinces and the federal government, which for a long time only addressed elementary and secondary education, but have increasingly added a post-secondary sector. I think we might have a strategy, but until there's an actual value proposition around research in French and research on la francophonie to guide that, I think it'll be difficult. And what you didn't hear in my last 30 seconds that I couldn't say is there's a cautionary tale. Because if we don't have it at the post-secondary level, why then should children register in elementary and secondary schools in French? So for me, it's just not a question about science. It's a question of the vitality of the French language communities, particularly in a minority context. So the spillover, in fact, is much greater than just about publications, because people see this. So why do I choose to study in French in the post-secondary? It's because I hope to be able to apply the language. But if we're not fixing that problem, well, why am I doing my undergraduate in French? Then why am I doing my high school in French? So, you hear kids say, I have enough French in grade 8 because I know I need to study in English to be successful in neuroscience. Alors, c'est ma réponse à votre question.
That's my answer to your question.
You the same question in terms of a strategy instead of having silos that I think have been identified here this evening from some of the testimony. How do we get a strategy where all of those who have a stake in the issues that we're debating come forward with something that actually works?
Madame la Présidente, je dirais...
Madam Chair, I would say that my colleague's answer really does point towards part of a solution that's important. Throughout the entirety of the educational process, French is thought differently than English. It requires a specific vocabulary in French so that people have access to knowledge in French across all disciplines. That's a good starting point. And then we need to consider all the players and for them create an environment that they need. The three councils, for example, the three granting agencies, rather, they need to better support research in French at all levels. Commitment is required to support the university community across the country in order to create a real Francophone environment in which research can be carried out. And if I may, throughout the entirety of the educational curriculum from elementary school right through PhD levels, raising sensitivity to the importance of French and favoring French. I'm going to pick up on what my colleagues have said, and I'll go a step further. Why not go to Section 23 of the Canadian Constitution and apply it to post-secondary education?
I regret your time's up. Perhaps you might want to ask Professor Villeneuve if she would like to table a response for you.
I'll do just that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Monsieur Blanchet-Jean-Cap, please.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will go back to Mr. Perrault and Ms. Pelletier of ACFAS. I'd like to go back to the support for research in French put out by the Quebec government as part of your research published in 2021. The importance of this sort of assistance. And could you tell us more of how important it would be for the federal government to do something similar to what Quebec has done? What do you expect from a federal effort? Madam Chair, I've mentioned the types of services that could be offered through what we're suggesting, this services to Francophone publishers. It would be kind of a one-stop stop to ensure that people wishing to publish in French could take advantage of an ability to do so thanks to funding. And ACFAS has decided to offer this sort of service. We've stepped up to the plate, and the Quebec government has given us a first grant. This is good, but we'll need an entire working team. We'll need to be able to manage grants we hope to receive from bodies across the country. We wouldn't necessarily set up our head office in Quebec or solely in Quebec. We might have offices across the country able to offer regionalized services, ensuring that links, of course, be strong among all players. And the federal government must support this project, fully support us, because it will allow us to ensure that French becomes a research language in Canada. Thank you. My next question is for Professor Villeneuve. You've mentioned the responsibility of the federal government to ensure that Canada is a bilingual country and to promote French, including as a research language. Since 2012, the federal government has dropped funding for symposiums on research in both official languages. Can you give me your point of view on the responsibility of the federal government and any other recommendations you may have? I think it's important to support research on language minorities. There are two important streams of that sort of research. The research, yes, and also events and support for publications and for the research community activities, either in person or online, that ensure that Francophone research flourishes. Right now we're speaking of research, but to ensure that the researchers of the future are there to carry out the researchers, you have to support their studies. Back to what Professor Lamoureux has said, I think the message we need to send is, I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. It's the worst part of this job. I hope you forgive me. And we'll go to Monsieur Boulouris for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair. Professor Villeneuve, it's been twice now that you've not been able to get through the entirety of your idea about how to help students. So I'd like to know where the story goes. All right, here it goes. We need professors and researchers, so professor researchers who are able to show their students that it is possible to carry out research and publish it in French. You need people who can teach in French, supervise research in French. That makes it a lived message, not just an aspiration on paper. In grant requests, for example, I can certainly imagine, a question: what will you do with this research? What will you publish? And who will you be supervising? Which students will you be supervising? There should be a linguistic incentive. Why not? If someone says, I'll be supervising 20 students with this grant, and 10 of them will be encouraged to work in French thanks to this grant, that's a number, yes, but the quality of that support counts as well. Thank you very much. Professor Perrault, you've mentioned the decline in number of scientific publications in Spanish and in a number of languages. Is there any reaction to that among scientists in Europe, let's say? Or is everyone just, falling in with using English? Madam Chair, the answer is simple. Yes, indeed, absolutely. In all societies and all scientific communities, this is becoming an issue. The transformation of dissemination modalities that will occur in the decades to come will hopefully generate possibilities for all languages, including French. We're trying to do a bit of futurology here. I'm not sure that the ways we publish now will be the ways we publish in the future. There may be a different way that science links itself to its communities, to milieu in a more dynamic fashion using local languages. I'm not sure if we have time for this, but research shows that if you publish solely in the major publications, well, you basically abandon local policies, local publication, and local communities.
Keeping these, I hate to interrupt all of you. I am going to give, because we start a couple minutes late, Monsieur Blanchard, one question, and then one question to Ms. Diab as well. So short question, short answer each.
Si, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Quickly, the people from ACVAS, the challenges of Francophone researchers. You say that the success level of grants requested in English is higher than if they're requested in French. At the CIHR, Canadian Institutes of Health, for example, less grants given to people who apply in French than in English. How do you explain this? Are people not as smart if they're French? Well, what I would say is pretty much what I said at the outset. Often a grant coming in French has already got a point against it. It's not given the same level of consideration when it comes in, especially if evaluators have self-evaluated their levels of bilingualism and actually have trouble grasping the subtleties of the language, the cultural subtleties, to really understand the project that they're reading. It's not about how intelligent the scientists are, the researchers are. It's, more about who's reading the research grant.
And now we'll go to Ms. Diab. Short question, short answer, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Short question. First, thanks to all our witnesses. Canada has set a Francophone immigration level and target, and it's an aim that I really support myself. We're working hard to ensure that we meet that target. We would all like to bring in brilliant foreign students and researchers to Canada. So how can we ensure we do this for Francophone post-secondary students and researchers? Whoever wishes to answer. Anyone feels they've got the answer? Professor Perrault, I see your hand up. Mr. Perrault? Yes, and Ms. Villeneuve will finish up if I don't say everything. I think we need to ensure that immigration takes place more quickly. In the university sector, wait times for immigration for students coming in from outside Canada are extremely long, such that very regularly people simply decide to go to some other country. Though we are a first-choice country, I think we have research environments that are dynamic, top-notch for research. There's no reason that people turn elsewhere just because wait times are too long. I add that Canada is a destination for international students. The idea is to keep them here in the Francophonie. Someone coming to Saint Jean campus from Alberta starts their studies in French. They quickly learn or note that English is what even the French-speaking students are using. So the idea is to switch them to Francophonie approaches and keep them there.
Let me say thank you for your time, your expertise, your experience, your ideas. We are all very, very grateful. And with that, we will say goodnight to our excellent witnesses. And to our colleagues here, we will, this completes the public portion of our meeting. So we will suspend briefly in order to go into in-camera proceedings. Thank you all very, very much.
Merci beaucoup. Bonne soirée.
Thank you.